Hey guys, have a video here for you. It is about the progressive era. So you'll learn what that is. It was took place in a direct response to industrialization. So I got the questions that I will pause and ask as we go. Just record them, Google Classroom private comment, or on a Google Doc and upload that way. I will also have the questions if there's any audio issues. The questions will be posted on Google Classroom for you to refer to as well. There are 10 questions. All right, so here we go.
So if the Gilded Age was the period when American industrial capitalism came into its own and people like Mark Twain began to criticize its associated problems, then the Progressive Era was the age in which people actually tried to solve those problems through individual and group action. As the economy changed...
All right, question one. What, in short, was the Progressive Era? How would you describe it based off of what he said? Again, what in short was the Progressive Era? Question one.
Progressives also had to respond to a rapidly changing political system. The population of the US was growing and its economic power was becoming ever more concentrated, and sometimes progressives responded to this by opening up political participation, and sometimes by trying to restrict the vote. The thing is, broad participatory democracy doesn't always result in effective government, he said, sounding like the Chinese National Communist Party. And that tension between wanting to have government for, of, and by the people and wanting to have government that's like good at governing kind of defined the progressive era, and also our era. But progressives were most concerned with the social problems that revolved around industrial capitalist society, and most of these problems weren't new by 1900, but some of the responses were. Companies, and later corporations, had a problem that had been around at least since the 1880s. They needed to keep costs down and profits high in a competitive market, and one of the best ways to do this was to keep wages low, hours long, and conditions appalling. Your basic house elf situation. Just kidding, house.
All right, question two. So what were businesses doing during this era in history to maximize their profits? Again, what were businesses doing to maximize their profits or just make a whole lot of money?
Themselves didn't get wages. Also, by the end of the 19th century, people started to feel like these large monopolistic industrial combinations, the so-called trusts, were exerting too much power over people's lives. The 1890s saw federal attempts to deal with these trusts, such as the Sherman Antitrust Act, but overall, the federal government wasn't where most progressive changes were made. For instance, there was muckraking, a form of journalism in which reporters would find some muck and rake it. Mass circulation magazines realized they could make money by publishing exposés of industrial and political abuse, so they did. Oh, it's time for the mystery document? I bet it involves muck. The rules here are simple. I guess the author of the mystery document, I'm either correct or I get shocked. Let a man so much as scrape his finger pushing a truck in the pickle rooms, and all the joints in his fingers might be eaten by the acid one by one. Of the butchers and floormen, the beef boners and trimmers, and all those who used knives, you could scarcely find a person who had the use of his thumb. Time and time again, the base of it had been slashed, till it was a mere lump of flesh against which the man pressed the knife to hold it. They would have no nails. They had worn them off, pulling hides. Wow. Well, now I am hyper aware of and grateful for my thumbs. They are just in excellent shape. I am so glad, Stan, that I am not a beef boner at one of the meat packing factories written about in the jungle by Upton Sinclair. No shock for me! Oh, Stan, I can only imagine how long and hard you've worked to get the phrase beef boner into this show, and you finally did it. Congratulations. By the way, just a little bit of trivia. The Jungle was the first book I ever read that made me vomit. So that's a review.
All right, so you might have to go back about the 2:30-minute mark, question three, but think about what he was just reading and what they were exposing in the what was called the jungle. And the question is, what did these muckrakers, as he said, what did they actually do? So again, what did the muckrakers, it's a funny word, I know, what did they do?
I don't know if it's positive, but there you go. Anyway, at the time, readers of the Jungle were more outraged by descriptions of rotten meat than by the treatment of meatpacking workers. The Jungle led to the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. That's pretty cool for Upton Sinclair, although my books have also...
All right, so question four, What did the government do in response to the conditions in these nasty meat plants? So again, what did the government do in response to stop what was going on in these gross, icky meat plants?
Also led to some federal legislation, such as the How, which officially declared Hazel and Augustus the nation's OTP. So to be fair, writers have been describing the harshness of industrial capitalism for decades, so muckraking wasn't really that new, but the use of photography for documentation was. Lewis Hine, for instance, photographed child laborers in factories and mines, bringing Americans face to face with the more than 2 million children under the age of 15 working for wages, and Hine's photos helped bring about laws that limited child labor. But even more important than the writing and photographs and magazines when it came to improving conditions for workers was Twitter. What's that? There was no Twitter? Still? What is this, 1812? All right, so apparently still.
All right, question 5. So what was done to help these children who were working in factories? Yes, all those pictures you just saw were 100% real. Those were kids working in factories, not in school. What was done to help them? That's question 5.
Still without Twitter, workers had to organize into unions to get corporations to reduce hours and raise their pay. Also,
all right, question 6, real quick here. So what were workers doing to try and fight against the businesses who were mistreating them to maximize their profits? So what did workers do to organize in order to fight against the businesses who were not treating them so well?
some employers started to realize on their own that one way to mitigate some of the problems of industrialization was to pay workers better. Like in 1914, Henry Ford paid his workers an average of $5 per day, unheard of at the time. Whereas today I pay Stan and Danica 3 times that, and still they whine. Ford's reasoning was that better paid workers would be better able to afford the Model Ts that they were making. And indeed, Ford's annual output rose from 34,000 cars to 730,000 cars between 1910 and 1916, and the price of a Model T dropped from $700 to $316. Still, Henry Ford definitely forgot to be awesome sometimes. He was anti-Semitic, he used spies in his factory, and he named his child Edsel. Also, like most employers at the turn of the century, he was virulently anti-union. So while the...
All right, so we're talking about progressivism, fixing problems. So question 7 is, what did Henry Ford, what was his impact in terms of maybe improving working conditions? How did he make progress in that? So again, what was Henry Ford's impact in terms of making life a little bit better for his workers?
The AFL was organizing the most privileged industrial workers. Another union grew up to advocate for rights for a larger swath of the workforce, especially the immigrants who dominated unskilled labor, the industrial workers of the world. They were also known as the Wobblies, and they were founded in 1905 to advocate for, quote, every wage worker, no matter what his religion, fatherland, or trade, and not, as the name Wobblies suggests, just those fans of wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey. The Wobblies were radical socialists. Ultimately, they wanted to see capitalism and the state disappear in revolution. Now, most progressives didn't go that far, but some, following the ideas of Henry George, worried that economic progress could produce a dangerous, unequal distribution of wealth that could only be cured by taxes. But more progressives were influenced by Simon W. Patton, who prophesied that industrialization would bring about a new civilization where everyone would benefit from the abundance and all the leisure time that all these new labor-saving devices could bring. This optimism was partly spurred by the birth of a mass consumption society. I mean, Americans by 1915 could purchase all kinds of newfangled devices like washing machines or vacuum cleaners, automobiles, record players. It's worth underscoring that all this happened in a couple generations. I mean, in 1850, almost everyone listened to music and washed their clothes.
All right, no question here. I'm just fast forwarding the video a touch because I want to get us to the last 2 questions that I will ask you.
And many progressives were concerned that industrial capitalism, with its exploitation of labor and concentration of wealth, was limiting rather than increasing freedom. depending on how you define freedom, of course. Industrialization created what they referred to as the labor problem, as mechanization diminished opportunities for skilled workers, and the supervised routine of the factory floor destroyed autonomy. The scientific workplace management advocated by efficiency expert Frederick W. Taylor required rigid rules and supervision in order to heighten worker productivity. So if you've ever had a job with a defined number of bathroom breaks, that's why. Also, Taylorism found its way into classrooms, and anyone who's ever had to sit in rows for 45-minute periods punctuated by factory-style bells knows that this atmosphere is not particularly conducive to a sense of freedom. Now, this is a little bit confusing because while responding to worker exploitation was part of the progressive movement, so was Taylorism itself, because it was an application of research, observation, and expertise to the vexing problem of how to increase productivity. And this use of
Second to last question. So just discuss what was this A. Frederick Taylor guy, or the creator of Taylorism. What was his philosophy on how to run a business, and what did he make his workers do? So again, one more time. So A. Frederick Taylor, what was his take on how we need to run a business and how the workers need to work and what they need to do throughout their day?
scientific experts is another hallmark of the progressive era, one that usually found its expression in politics. American progressives, like their counterparts in the green sections of Not America, sought government solutions to social problems. Germany, which is somewhere over here, pioneered social legislation with its minimum wage, unemployment insurance, and old age pension laws. But the idea that government action could address the problems and insecurities that characterize the modern industrial world also became prominent in the United States. And the notion that an activist government could enhance rather than threaten people's freedom was something new in America. Now, progressives pushing for social legislation tended to have more success at the state and local level, especially in cities, which established public control over gas and water and raised taxes to pay for transportation and public schools, whereas federally, the biggest success was like prohibition, which...
All right, guys, last question. So this was a major shift in government philosophy in America. So the government began to raise more taxes, which is boo, we don't like that. But what did they start to use those taxes for? All right, so one more time. Progressive government was starting to raise taxes, okay, which is a negative in many people's eyes. But what were they using those taxes for, which was a definite change from before? All right, that's the last question.